So I don't know if you are into trivia or I won't say useless bits of information because you never know when some little obscure bit of information may come in handy. You can dazzle your friends and impress folks in the office or at company parties. But I wanted to share a few things because I like trivia and bits of information like that. Did you know that the town of Hobart, Oklahoma, not very far west from us, it was named after Garrett Hobart? If you don't know who Garrett Hobart was, he was the 24th Vice President of the United States of America. Did you know that? I don't know why Hobart was named after Garrett Hobart. He was not from Oklahoma. He's not from the territory, not from this side of the country at all. He's a New Jersey boy, born and raised. He's a New Jersey businessman and lawyer. I guess they just liked the name. Poteau, Oklahoma, on the other side of the state, right on the Arkansas border. Whether you knew it or not, its claim to fame is it is home to Kavanaugh Hill. You ever heard of Kavanaugh Hill? Well, you should have, because Kavanaugh Hill is the highest hill in the world. Do you know what the difference between a hill and a mountain are? A mountain, it becomes officially a mountain once it hits 2,000 feet. Kavanaugh Hill is 1,999 feet. There you go. The world's highest hill. Okemah, you've heard of Okemah? It's the home of Woody Guthrie. Maybe you knew that. Henrietta is the town where Troy Aikman went to high school and graduated before he became the great football star and announcer that he is today. But even before Troy Aikman was in Henrietta, Henrietta was the home of rodeo royalty. The late Jim Shoulders and his lovely wife Sharon called Henrietta home. Jim Shoulders was 16-time world champion rodeo cowboy. Henrietta is still home to Jim and Sharon's son, Marvin Paul, and his wife, Lori. Marvin Paul is also an inductee to the Rodeo Cowboy Hall of Fame, and his lovely wife, Lori, was an accomplished barrel racer when she was in college. They are wonderful friends of ours, two of the finest people you'll ever meet. I try to learn something interesting about each of the communities, each of the towns that we've had the honor of being a part of living. And those are some of the interesting things and some of the places that we've lived. One of the more interesting stories about an Oklahoma community is the history of the town of Cookson, Oklahoma. Are you familiar with Cookson? Cookson is located on the east shore of Lake Tenkiller over on the east side of the state. The town of Cookson was established in the late 1890s, about 60 years, a little over 60 years before there ever was a Lake Tenkiller. However, the community of Cookson, when it was established, was not in the same location that it is now. You see, when the plans for the Illinois River to be dammed for flood control purposes were announced, the entire community of Cookson, which was located on the shores of the Illinois River, had to be relocated. A school was moved, the Cookson store was moved, some of the churches were moved, the post office was moved, the cemetery was moved. There were a few other buildings, but most of the homes and most of the other buildings in town were left. All those buildings and places that were moved about 2 miles up the hill and to the east. There are still houses and other structures under the water at Lake Tenkiller. I think that's very interesting. Stories like that may not be all that common, but they are certainly not unique. In the state of Maine, in the early 1940s, there was a town called Flagstaff that was located on the shores of the Dead River. And Flagstaff, back in the early 40s, was named as the proposed site for a new hydroelectric dam. And it was exciting time for the citizens there of Flagstaff, Maine. They were looking forward to all the new jobs that would be created. They were looking forward to the tourist industry that would explode and cause their little town to thrive. Tourists would be coming to the lake. The community would grow. Things were really, really looking up for Flagstaff in Maine, but then the plans and the details of the plans were announced. And it was discovered, it was learned that the location of the dam would result in the town of Flagstaff being flooded. Everything in Flagstaff would eventually be underwater. All the stores, all the schools, all the churches, everything. And the people that were living in Flagstaff were told they would have to move. They didn't have a choice. Flagstaff, the town, would soon become Flagstaff, the lake, literally. So during the months that followed, after this announcement happened, something very, very interesting occurred in Flagstaff. Nothing. All improvements stopped. People didn't paint their houses. People did not repair homes or businesses, any structure at all. People the town made no improvements to sidewalks or roads. The whole town began to deteriorate. And it happened a long time before the waters ever came. And the town began to deteriorate so much that it really looked shabby. It looked ghost townish, even though many people had yet to move away. And the saddest year, according to some who remember those days, was the year 1949. That's the year when Central Maine Power Company sent in foresters to begin cutting down trees and clearing whole swaths of land. The roads to Flagstaff were discontinued. Cemeteries were dug up. And as the woodsmen were clearing the land, a lot of the brush they set fire to, and there were fires burning all over the place. It was an inferno. One person remembered there were fires everywhere, and it was especially bad, he said, for the elderly. One of the citizens of Flagstaff explained it this way: where there is no hope in the future, there is no power in the present. This community of Flagstaff was once a vibrant community. It was once full of life, and now it was apathetic. It was full of despair. The citizens' visions of a brighter future had dissipated, so that all they could see now was the tunnel at the end of the light. When Isaiah the prophet begins his prophecy in Judah, it comes at the heels of perhaps the greatest time of prosperity experienced in the land of Israel and Judah since maybe the days of Solomon, some 250 years earlier. For about 60 years, commerce had been good, exceedingly good. Trade was thriving. Towns were built. The kingdom of Judah and Israel expanded. And the wealth and the prosperity of the citizenry increased dramatically. Things were really looking up for those folks. And just as it appeared that everything was going right in the world for them, it was really about to get bad. Very, very bad. The Assyrians began to push westward with tremendous aggression. The northern kingdom of Israel was conquered, and all of her people were deported, never to return. Many of them never, ever to return. Judah, the southern kingdom, was forced to pay heavy taxes to the Assyrian king. And then it got worse. After suffering at the hands of the Assyrians for a while, the Hebrew people came to experience even harsher and more severe, more oppressive treatment at the hands of the Babylonians. You see, the Babylonians eventually conquered Judah and exiled her people. And Isaiah warns the people of Judah about the impending exile, about the coming defeat at the hands of the Babylonians. He tells all the people about the days, about the very difficult days that they are going to face. Isaiah is pointing, in fact, to the tunnel at the end of the light. And people like us in the modern, or this postmodern world of the West, when we read in the Old Testament, we're often struck by the harsh and critical sounding message of the prophets. When we think of the Old Testament prophets, we often imagine in our minds these words of condemnation and judgment, either against the rulers or against the people. We hear these prophets' words out of their mouths proclaiming judgment on the people for their great sin, for their great wickedness. And you know, there certainly is some of that to be found in Isaiah. And yet, Jewish theologian Abraham Heschel reminds us that prophetic predictions that are harsh and condemning are seldom ever final. Abraham Heschel says that no word is God's final word. He says that judgment is conditional. A change in a person's heart will bring about a change in God's judgment. No word is God's final word. See, nothing can obscure God's redeeming love. And prophets like Isaiah knew this. And we see this in Isaiah's words in the text we read today. The desert will bloom. The desert will blossom. God will build a highway, and the highway will lead home. And that highway to home will be built through the desert. And that highway will be a way for all of his people. Isaiah, the harsh prophet, is ultimately a messenger of hope. Isaiah, the prophet, proclaims that God is present and God will save. Even in the midst of suffering, even in the midst of exile in a foreign land far from home, God will intervene. God will do for them. God will do for God's people what they cannot do for themselves. And that message is for us. See, this is far from wishful thinking on Isaiah's part. It's not wishful thinking for anyone who has eyes of faith. Isaiah's hope for a new vision is proclaimed in this passage. God will act, he says. The God who created everything out of no thing, God who created light out of darkness, God who brings forth life out of death, finds his people in Egypt, and he brought them forth with a mighty hand. This is the God who Isaiah says will reach out to these exiled people in Babylon, and he will cause the desert to be transformed, and he will bring home the weak of hand and the feeble of knee. This is the God that will cause the blind and the lame and the deaf, and indeed all of God's people, even those who aren't very bright, all of God's people will be making this journey home, and not one of them will be lost. About 700 years after Isaiah paints this beautiful picture of hope for those who were exiled, God again sees and hears and intervenes on behalf of his people. People who had little hope, people who have already passed from light into darkness, that darkness of the tunnel called the Roman Empire. God came into the world at a place called Bethlehem for the purpose of delivering God's people. And he does it again. He has delivered God's people. He has delivered God's people. God has delivered the people. And God comes to Bethlehem to do it again, this time through the birth of a baby. You see, it doesn't matter the time or the place. Even when the world around them gave little evidence of justice or righteousness or hope, the God of all creation intervenes and leads God's people on the journey home. But notice something else. When God intervenes, God does not just reach down and pluck up these people from where they are and immediately deposit them in their destination. God does not reach out into the Hebrews in Egypt and snatch them up and drop them immediately into the promised land. But what God does, God makes a way. God does not lead the Israelites to the promised land without having them journey to get there. God brings the Hebrew people home from Babylon, but they had to walk along the highway to get back. They had to make the trip through the desert to come home. The disciples didn't just hang out with Jesus when he came to town. They traveled the dusty roads of Palestine with him. God will intervene for us, but in a way in which we are invited to journey with him. And not just with him, with each other. I shared with the kids just a little bit ago. We're in this together. We make this journey together with each other. And God is in our midst. And it's only in this journey that we discover the depths of God, the depths of God's love. It's only in this journey that we discover the depths of ourselves. It's only in this journey that we are able to glimpse the new vision of the way things can be. And this too is part of the prophet's message of hope. Part of the message of hope is we journey together. We discover together. We grow together. Lake Flagstaff in Maine today is a beautiful place. The area draws thousands of tourists each year. Tenkiller is a beautiful lake, and it draws thousands of tourists each year. The hopes and the dreams of the people in both of these places were eventually realized. Their lives have improved. They just had to make a journey of a few miles for it to happen. They had to grow into a new vision before it happened. The message of the prophet still holds hope for us today. Look, I don't pretend to know where each of you are right now in your life or what direction you are heading spiritually or emotionally. I don't know what's going on in your life or your relationships. You may feel like you are exiled somewhere in the desert. Perhaps you are staring at the looming darkness of the fast approaching tunnel at the end of the light. Perhaps you're full of fear or doubt or confusion or uncertainty. Maybe you're already in that tunnel. I don't know. But if any of that is the case, then this message today is for you. And the message is that you can shout for joy because God, our God, has power. And not only the power, but our God has the prerogative to transform and to change ordinary lives, to change the realities of this world, to change the circumstances, the doubts and the fears and the confusion. And God will make all things new. And we are invited to journey with God along these paths to this newness. That is a message of hope that I hope you hear. I pray that you hear that. But maybe that's not you. Maybe that's not where you are. Maybe you've already passed through your dark wilderness or through your desert or through your dark tunnel. Maybe you've already experienced transformation at some level or in some way in your life. And if that is you, if you have been through the desert, if you've come out of the dark tunnel, if you have experienced this transformation, here's a message for you. There are weak hands that need to be strengthened. There are feeble knees that need to be steadied. There are fearful hearts that need encouragement. There are blind and deaf and lame who need a reason to hope. There are folks who are experiencing doubt and confusion who need a word of encouragement and hope. And you can be messengers of good news. You can be messengers of hope to all these folks. You can come alongside them and make this journey across the desert with them. You can lead them by the hand as you walk down the highway to God's home. You can be a messenger of good news and hope to those folks. Listen to the prophet. Hear the words of Isaiah. God, our faithful God, continues to do for us what we cannot do for ourselves. God continues to make a way for us. God overcomes chaos to deliver his people and bring exiles home for Christmas and make the desert bloom. God will lead you, will lead us through the dark tunnel back into the holy light. This is our vision of hope for this Advent season. Come, Lord Jesus, come. In the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit.